Hi everybody, I'm going to read you something, and I hope you like it. As persons began to question and refuse to submit to monarchy, then came the establishment of the commune, or as you might know it, the constitutional government. Unfortunately, these never last. Afterwards, it was seen to devolve and to degenerate into a sham as men degraded and treated politics more and more in this state as a source of pecuniary gain, and the inevitable result of this was oligarchy. From oligarchy to tyranny, from tyranny to democracy yet again, from democracy to oligarchy, and round and round and round we go. The oligarchs continually narrowed the range of the privileged class and so augmented the strength of the populace as they rose in revolt and founded democracies once again. And now that the state has grown to still yet large dimensions, it is perhaps no longer very easy to establish any other type of polity than a democracy. Where persons are all alike, at least they're supposed to be in theory, there must be the same justice and deserts for all. In practice, however, that never turns out to be the case. Equal justice under the law is simply a lie that they tell themselves. Second, the law of supremacy as the supremacy of law recognizes that every individual must be underneath the rule of law in order for democracy to work. Law, therefore, being, as they say, the intelligence, but without the passion or without the favoritism. Third, it was near impossible for any singular individual, however great he might be, to attend large numbers of people, so that government must be on a cooperative exercise. No, it must be on a democratic basis. And yet democracy itself devolves. Oh, poor Democrats, if they could only see the demagoguery of themselves in their ignorant caprice, the tyranny of the mob, anarchy, factioning. These are some of democracy's most potent and patent evils. The fall of every republic follows. Pride, arrogance, cruelty. The republic was established, and for 2 centuries and a half that followed, the administrative machinery of the republic received much elaboration, unfortunately, very little augmentation. The champions of popular rights were gradually domesticated, defanged, and became the loyal henchmen of the politicos and their financiers and patrons. Yet the Constitution and how it was implemented in fact always differed, as in America and the South. When the Constitution spoke of liberty and justice for all, the practice was slavery. The concentration of power and wealth into the hands of a few at the expense of the many, without any feeling of responsibility on the part of the few for the many, was palpable. The government's legislative meeting days were abridged for nearly every reason imaginable, every religious holiday, and every amusement day. There weren't any whom enjoyed the deliberative or the executive powers to speak of, and so couldn't remedy this, and legislation, nominations, acts, etc. were all subject to prohibitively difficult levels of obstruction. Thus, with government shutdowns becoming a regular occurrence and the government then becoming limp and impotent, it spent a whole lot of time and a whole lot of money to put on quite a show of the opposite, to mask how ineffective it was for the general public. At home and abroad, everything was done at the bidding of only a few men. Theirs belonged the Treasury Department and the State Department, in fact every department, all led by the same pool of people, the rich and the well-connected. The people in the most poverty-stricken areas, however, were faced with a choice. They could either stay poor, or they can die in military service trying to get out of poverty. As it wore out, it degenerated into an oligarchy, if it wasn't yet one already, but a very narrow one and exclusive. Governing had become extremely difficult, and many serious problems complicated it. Political, social, economic. People were rioting, and they demanded change, and they confronted the state, and they demanded solutions to these ills. The tackling of these problems called for the highest and the best statesmanship. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the politics of the day, all of the Republic's politicians were unequal to this task. The Republic then became discredited, unpopular, as did democracy around the globe, and soon some began to loudly question its necessity, and some even defy its authority. Misgovernment and incompetence were a pox on all governmental houses. The Republic drifted helplessly, sometimes literally so. Hi, Puerto Rico! And affairs went from bad to worse. Personal government was emerging as the only option left, and the most attractive one after the Republic failed and fell, not with a bang, but with a whimper. But don't tell any of the factions inside the government that, because they would never know the difference. The governmental machine went on, though it was worn out beyond the ability to ever repair. The constitutional development of the Republic ended in complete shipwreck. The oligarchs and all of their support in government lacked the men and any political sense, really, for a concerted political effort to remedy any of this, or a coup to fight. So, less than 10 years after their dictator had gone, the oligarchs collapsed. The Democrats, in the loyal opposition, having no exact definite object or program with which wasn't a fad or whim or trend of the moment to stand on, had no idea what to do. They had no direction to take the country in. They were drained by the disappearance of the country's middle class. They were reduced to an unorganized and poverty-stricken base of an urban proletariat, a workforce who themselves were bound by debt and work to the service of the big capitalists whose humble servants to the Democratic Party they had always become. That they had always been. Now look at how low they had fallen. Look at what they had become. They found that they could create nothing amongst themselves. They had no solutions that weren't just repeated. The only thing they did create was more disorder. And eventually, the Democrats surrendered to the military power which made use of it without reserve as a scruple in its advance to personal government. It became more and more apparent that monarchy was the solution, a necessity for the people to survive the collapse of their own country. Monarchical ideas very slowly began to gain ground once again. Benevolent autocracy was emerging and coming. The concentration of power and the centralization of power into one group of people and then into one man, with the premise being that he can more firmly and more easily be reasoned with than can a mob of voters who will need public input, public commentary period, a debate, a voting period, and then the results implemented. The barbarians were outside and at the gate, as it were, and the defects of the Constitution demanded external and extended dominion. And so, along came monarchy once again, answering the crying need of the hour as a strong and established centralized authority, standing above parties and above factions, and directing the affairs of state firmly, with justice and impartiality. It might sound like I'm speaking of America. I'm not. This is word for word my handwritten copy of the history of the Roman Republic. It lasted about the same amount of time as America is about right now. 200 and something odd years? 2 centuries and a half? History repeats, they say. Maybe I'm not the crazy one, everyone. Maybe I'm just ahead of the curve.